Lessons in Truth, Emilie Cady. This is such a typical unity story. Charles Fillmore had been approached by a lot of people to have a series of lessons back in the 19th century. And instead of writing them himself, he remembered a woman who had written one article called Finding the Christ Within. And he published it in his Unity magazine. He'd never met her. In fact, he never would meet her. She never would set foot in a single Unity church in her entire life. But he hired her, intuitively knowing she was the perfect person to write the lessons of Unity's basic teachings. A person who never set foot in a Unity church or met the founders. It never was copyrighted, so you can buy all kinds of pirated copies on Amazon. How many people have a copy of Lessons in Truth at home? If you don't have one, go back to the bookstore and get one, or get one online, because this is really a seminal book in understanding of our spiritual awakening. And the thing about the book I notice is that the first 2/3 of it talk about how to develop your belief system, how to let go of your old beliefs and to take on a new set of beliefs that can really change your life. And then the last third tells you how to let go of all of it, and completely contradicts the first 2/3. In fact, she says in the last third of the book, I know I'm contradicting myself, basically deal with it. Because she's saying that there's a point in development where you've got to let go of what you know. I let go of what I know. Together, I let go of what I know. And I am open and receptive. Together, and I am open and receptive. To what? Exactly. To what? To God. This lesson today is the nature of God, and it's really based on chapters 1, 2, and 7, and it really has three concepts. One is, what is God? What's separating you from God? And where are you going to find God? Where do you find God? What is God? What's separating you? Where do you find God? What is God? What is God? You know, let go of your pictures of God. I remember when I was teaching, my first time I ever taught this book, my very first church, 32 years ago, there was a woman there who'd been attending the Al-Anon group in the church, but she was a devout Lutheran, never had attended a Unity church, and somebody told her, you know, Unity's pretty close to the 12-step principles, since the founders of 12 Steps studied Unity and New Thought work. And so, you know, you might want to check it out. So she came to the class, and so I was sharing in the first chapter, it talks about how God isn't so much experienced as a being as God is experienced as being. God is a verb more than a noun in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible. The burning bush, Jehovah, Yahweh. Moses said, well, who's talking to me? I'm going to have to tell these people I'm supposed to take them from bondage to liberty, from Egypt to Israel. Who shall I say is sending me? And the voice in that light, in that bush, in that burning bush said, tell them I am that I am sent you. I am that I am. Not a person, not a noun, but the verb in Hebrew, to be. The verb, to be. The activity of being, a flowing activity, constantly unfolding. You know, I shared at the first service about how Unity Village has a swimming pool. It was built in 1921. It's on the National Historical Register. And it's very unique because it's basically part of a flowing stream. A stream flows, it doesn't have any chlorine in it because the stream flows into it. And then it's gathered there, and then it has a dam on the other end, and then a water flow. It's constantly flowing in and flowing out, so the water is always sweet and fresh and always being renewed. And that is the experience of God. Whatever you think your idea of God is, let something new come in. Because God is a flowing, God is a movement. Jesus said the sign of the Spirit is a movement and a rest. It's constantly moving, it's constantly flowing. So what is this? What is this God? In my very first church, I was teaching this concept of God as being, and that woman I was telling you about raised her hand and she said, if God isn't a person, then who is the old man on the throne on the cloud with the beard that appears every time I close my eyes and pray? And I said to her, well, who do you think it is? Well, God. So what am I supposed to do with him? And I said, that is your subconscious's own picture that is giving you a sense of focus and identity and comfort, and so you can focus your faith. But God is more than any picture That's just what came to help you. And she really puzzled over it. But she read that very first paragraph in the book and took it to heart. In entering upon this course of instruction, lay aside all your previous theories and beliefs. In so doing, you'll be saved the trouble of trying to put new wine into old wineskins. And if there's anything that you don't agree with or understand, just let it sit passively in your mind until you've read the entire book. For many statements that would at first arouse antagonism will be clear and easily accepted a little later on. And after the course is completed, if you want to return to your old beliefs and your ways of thinking, you are at perfect liberty to do so. We'll give you back your old stale belief system or your money back, you know? But for the time being, be willing to become as a little child, for as a master in spiritual things said, unless you become like children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. And so she worked with this. She began to see God not so much as a being, but as being, and understanding that God can be experienced in an infinite number of ways. God is law, God is love, God is being, God is a being. God is infinite. Therefore, you can experience God in an infinite number of ways, but be open to something new, to a new experience. Let that refreshing water come in and experience something that maybe overturns your view of God. You know, we think we know the truth, but the truth is always more. We're evolving souls. We're constantly in our greening edge. We're constantly growing and evolving and moving. And that's what this book teaches. The first time that I taught it, I watched her and she began to work with it and realized that it really was in alignment with her 12-step principles, and she began to move with it. She became a very advanced mystic over the next 7 years I was there. Charles Fillmore taught May Rowland, who was the founder of, the leader of Silent Unity for 50 years. She said this many, many times, that Charles Fillmore said there comes a time, no matter how brilliant of a metaphysician you are, how much you understand the teachings of unity, the principles, there's a time you've got to set them aside and become a mystic. To move from the teachings to the experience, from the noun to the verb. And how do you do that? Well, how do you do that? You turn within. We had that experience during our meditation, didn't we? We turned within. This is a meditation technique adapted by a Unity minister, Doug Bodorf, and I readapted and changed some of it. And it comes from her method, Emilie Cady's method of meditation. I suggest that you take it every day and take it maybe for 5 minutes, maybe for longer. What you'll find is that you love it so much, you love this experience of being in the presence that you want to spend more time. And you find that the meditation starts meditating you. You know, I was just reading in a magazine Lynn had called Neurology Now. She said it's like psychology today, and I said, yeah, it's like proctology presently. It's one of those, one of those magazines. And in it, they have an article that talks about how when people meditate, there's 2 parts of the brain that are activated when you're worried about the future or you're obsessed about the past. You're worrying about the future, you're obsessed about the past, keeps you from being in the present moment. And those 2 parts of the brain are heavily active in people who are doing that. But people who meditate for 20 minutes a day, after 2 weeks, those parts quiet down, even when they're not meditating. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be wonderful? And this is that aspect of your being that you can experience. That is that active presence of God. So, what is God? The nature of God. What is God? God is love. Jesus gave us a lot of suggestions, but he only gave one commandment, love. Everything else is just a suggestion. But the commandment is love. God is love. You can experience that essence of your being. And then there's something that's blocking your experience, that is in the way between you and your experience of God in the now moment. What is that? What's seeming to separate you from God? Unforgiveness, false beliefs, things that you're holding in your subconscious mind. Unforgiveness. You have things that you've been holding on to that you need to let go of. false beliefs. Those false beliefs can be retrained. They found that by retraining people's false beliefs and let them go and retraining them to have true beliefs, that they have in clinical studies as good an outcome in terms of mild to moderate depression as taking the most popular antidepressant. Just retraining your false beliefs, bringing these things up. But there's a teaching in this book, Lessons in Truth, called Chemicalization, that is in the 7th chapter, that was taken out right after Charles Fillmore died. You see, Charles Fillmore wasn't there to say no, and what they called the correspondence school ladies kind of took over. And they decided that it was a negative teaching, that it was too disturbing and it might upset people, so they took it out altogether. And when somebody had a Xerox copy of it and shared it with the ministerial school class I was in, we were outraged because it helped us so much to understand what we were going through. Ministerial school is a very frothy and yeasty time, very difficult at times. One of my classmates said it was, in 2 years, it was 20 years of spiritual growth, 30 years of psychological growth, and 2 years of hell. We were going through a lot of stuff. And then we read this in the original Lessons in Truth. Did you ever put baking soda into vinegar and witness the agitation or excited action that takes place? One of the substances neutralizes the other and brings things into balance. This is a good illustration of what takes place in the minds and bodies of people. Perhaps you've lived in wrong thought for years and you've become solidified in that wrong belief. But after a little time, a sort of mental ferment and agitation takes place in the face of the affirmations you're saying. All the new beliefs that have lifted you into a new world for a few days seem failures. What has happened? This. There's been a clash between your old condition, based on falsehood and fear and wrong ways of thinking, and the new thought or truth entering into you. The old mortal self is kicking vigorously against the truth. If you feel this feeling of discouragement, of fear, do not be frightened. What you feel is on the spiritual plane, similar to the excitement and agitation that is seen in the chemical reaction between the alkali and acid on the material plane. And something better and higher always results. So there's a release that you have to go through. And when I was in ministerial school, it really helped me. And we brought the petition to the people who would publish things at Unity. We said, put it back. Put this teaching back. And they did. And it's helped people ever since, because it talks about, well, it was actually quoted. This actual chapter that was taken out was quoted frequently by Emmett Fox in his writings, attributed to Emilie Cady, was frequently attributed by Catherine Ponder in her work. She usually had a chapter on chemicalization. It's that release of the old when you change your belief system. At Unity Village, the water supply comes from a lake, and they don't really, at least they didn't when I was a student, filter it. So one day in May, every year, the heat, and imagine the heat is the light of God that is shining in your life through affirmation and meditation and whatever. The heat comes down and shines and shines and shines, the sun, and then a certain temperature is reached in the lake and the whole thing turns over, and you turn on your tap and it comes out brown. The muck on the bottom comes up. That talks about the chemicalization process, and you just have to let that period pass. And then I found that there were certain methods that you can use to release and to help this. One of the greatest illustrations, and I asked him at the first service, can I tell this at the second service? Because it was kind of a freaky woo-woo story. So they all said it was okay. Peggy said it, so complain to her if you don't like it. It makes me look kind of weird. But I came into a church where there were things going on, but it wasn't anything terrible, but I had some concerns about some things. But what I didn't know was in my subconscious mind, I had a lot of fears based on past experiences, past pain, things that I hadn't forgiven or released. So I was feeling agitated one Sunday afternoon after giving a service, and Monday was my day off, and I was meditating and I was asking, why am I feeling this feeling? And I just got the name of a town nearby. Popped into my head. I thought, well, I'll just get in my car and I'll drive there. I packed my bag, I went there, I found a Holiday Inn, I went in there. They said it was 1 hour until the room would be ready, and I turned around and there was a psychic fair. Well, I go to psychic fairs. But there was a woman sitting there, and she said they had no customers. So she said, well, for $5 I'll give you a tarot card reading. Well, I didn't really care, but I had an hour to kill. I had nothing else to do. She did the cards. It was horrible. She said it was the worst reading she'd ever done. Death and destruction and horrible negative things. She said, I'm so sorry. She was the sweetest, nicest woman. She felt so guilty. She said, it's me, it's my, I woke up in a bad mood this morning. Let me try it again. Worse than the first time. The Armageddon, the clash of the universes, horrible things. She said it was even worse. The first one was the worst she'd ever done. This was worse. She said, no, let me try it again. You guessed it. The third one was worse than the first two. And she was so apologetic. I really didn't feel like checking in right then. So I got in my car, I drove home, and I sat down. I said, what do I do? And the name of a woman who I'd known, who'd been in my congregation, Dr. Mary Allen, who wrote Explorer's Odyssey, came to me. And I called her on the phone. And she shared a method, a technique, called the agitated energy process, which we have back on the rack by the door of Fellowship Hall. So you can do that as a journaling technique. And it was a way to clear out false beliefs. Well, guess what? Nothing bad happened. Now, one bad thing happened to me, but I got a chance to clear out my false beliefs, my subconscious mind. In a sense, she was picking up on what I was holding without conscious awareness in my subconscious. And I was able to let it go. Where in your life are you holding on to subconscious false beliefs? Who is it that you need to let go of and forgive? I had an experience of this when I was single. I had this repeated pattern where I would find someone, she would be very nice, but I never would date a woman who was smoking. I just had a thing about it, partially because my mom had smoked when I was young and then she quit, but I just had a thing about smoking. I found out through this experience where that came from. Because this repeated itself time and time again, where I would start being with somebody, I would start dating someone, and then she'd start smoking. It turned out she smoked all along, but I didn't know it. And then suddenly I'm going, and I would at first I would argue or, say I don't like it or whatever. Finally, I realized there's something going on with me. There's something that's happening every time. This is too weird. So I asked, what's going on? And I saw a pack of cigarettes in the back of a kitchen cabinet, and it came back to me for the first time since I was 6 years old. My mom, I found her stash of cigarettes that she was sneaking. And I'd never had any memory of my parents up to that point. I never had any experience of them not being totally in the up and up with me. So I was really devastated by it. Well, it turns out she successfully stopped and whatever. I'm sure I was a part of that, finding her stash. But it really affected me, but I had buried it in my subconscious. And as soon as I went in, I did my spiritual work, I released this. It never happened again. Now, if I could only get Lynn to stop chewing tobacco. There's somebody in this room who believes that's true. I just know. But there, when you want to expand your consciousness, you bring the light into your life. If, let's say, you wanted to expand your house, you wanted to remodel your house, you have to knock down some walls. This is the knocking down walls in consciousness. This is the release, doing the forgiveness work. There are two techniques I want to share. We've got sheets of paper with the techniques on them right outside of Fellowship Hall. One's the 7-step process. It's excellent. You can do journaling with it. The other's the agitated energy process with Dr. Mary Allen. Because of that phone call I made to her, she became my mentor for the next 5 years until she passed. We worked every week together. I got to experience so much of a clearing of my subconscious. It's an incredibly expanding part of your life when you're willing to face and let go. As Freud said, it's better to face and deal with these things than to live them out for the rest of your life, even though you experience a momentary discomfort. And the third thing, there's what is God, what's between you and God, and the third thing is, where do you find God? Where can you find God? Well, is God out here? Certainly. But where you really find God is in here. She teaches a concept called personality and individuality, which is perhaps hard to grasp at first until you realize it's just talking about lower self and higher self. The personality is your ego self, your lower self. It's that which feels separate from God. And your individuality is your higher self, the soul of you, your essence. We were in a memorial service yesterday, and people were sharing their eulogies, and the woman at hand, in her last 4 years of life, she'd been a very tough person, and she'd softened, and this inner aspect came out, and she became this non-judgmental person in the present moment? Many of us have experienced that, where that inner self, that higher self, comes out at the end of physical life. The individuality, the soul, the essence of your being. That happened with my dad. As he was dying, he became more and more transparent, more and more present. There was like a light around him. And even people that seem not at all like that, there often comes a peace and a light and an energy that comes forth from their being. Why wait until that time in your life? You can cultivate that in the here and now. You can decide that you're not going to live just from your personality, and maybe the place where that begins is to realize that you don't have a soul. You are a soul. You're not a personality, a human being who has a soul, a spiritual aspect. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. You are a soul. And there are times in your life when you've experienced that, when you felt that presence. Maybe it was when you were 4 years old. Maybe it was a time in nature. Maybe it was a time when you got outside of yourself and stopped thinking about your own needs. You know, when you're sitting with someone in the hospice and they can't give you anything. You can't get anything out of them. You don't want anything from them. You just love them. And then through that, you get to experience this aspect of being. Meditation is another way that we experience this. Think about in your life where you can take some time, and I invite you to use this meditation technique that you have in your bulletin every day for the next 3 weeks as we go through this study of Lessons in Truth. Maybe for 5 minutes, maybe for 10 minutes, maybe for a half an hour, but moving with it, letting it meditate you. And that's what Charles Fillmore said was the true Holy Communion. Isn't something that's contained in an outer ritual, but rather is experienced when you open up to the presence of God within you by appropriating the statements of truth, the divine ideas contained within those statements of truth. This is a powerful, life-transforming book. It was the favorite book is the favorite book of Maya Angelou. I want to read to you something that I read in one of her autobiographies. Her story was a very difficult one. She had very serious abuse in childhood. It led to her, in her teenage years, becoming a prostitute. In her early 20s, she was a madam. And during that period of time, she wanted to go legit. She started taking vocal lessons, acting lessons from a man named Frederick Wilkerson in San Francisco. This is what she said about it. In my early 20s in San Francisco, I was a sophisticate and an acting agnostic. It wasn't so much that I stopped believing in God, it's just that God didn't seem to hang around the neighborhoods that I frequented. Then a voice teacher introduced me to Lessons in Truth, published by Unity. The teacher, Frederick Wilkerson, asked me to read to him. I was 24, very erudite, very worldly. He asked that I read that passage from Lessons in Truth, which ended in these words: God loves me. I read the piece, closed the book, and the teacher said, now read it again. I pointedly opened the book and sarcastically read, God loves me. He said, again. After the 7th repetition, I began to sense that there might be truth to the statement, that there was a possibility that God really did love me, Maya Angelou. I suddenly began to cry at the grandness of it all. I knew that if God loved me, then I might do wonderful things. I could try great things, learn anything, achieve anything. For what could stand against me with God, since one person, any person with God, constitutes the majority? And she made a dedicated study of this book, and it changed her life. I invite you to join with the rest of the congregation over the next 2 weeks to make a dedicated study of this book. A lot of people have tried to improve on it over the years in Unity, and nobody's been able to do it yet. Although it's written in 19th century language, the truths are timeless. It's truly a foundation piece of new thought. And I'd like to invite you to join with me now and just open yourself up and And take these words of Emilie Cady as your true words. Once again, in this time, touch into a deeper place. And let that deeper place within you speak these words silently. God abides within me. God is alive in me now. God is all power. God is the fulfillment of all I desire. My innermost God presence now radiates from the center to the circumference of my being. I give thanks that God hears and now comes forth into my visible world as the fulfillment of my true desire. God, I dedicate myself to living from the inside out, from the center to the circumference, in the presence of true being. Thank you, dear God. Thank you, loving Spirit. And so it is. Amen. Come next week and I'm going to sing my Lessons in Truth song. Take a deep breath. And this morning we're beginning a series on Lessons in Truth by Emilie Cady. And she has a wonderful series of affirmations that she shares as a meditation technique. And we can take these into our deepest being. This is truly taking in the Spirit of God and making it part of us. So quiet your mind. Still your emotions. Let go. Let go. Let go your body. Be aware of your breathing, your heart beating, and take these as your silent statements from within. God abides within me. God abides within me. God is alive in me now. God is alive in me now. God is all power. God is all power. God is the fulfillment of all I desire. God is the fulfillment of all I desire. My innermost God presence now radiates from the center to the circumference of my being. My innermost God presence now radiates from the center to the circumference of my being. I give thanks that God hears and now comes forth into my visible world as the fulfillment of my true desire. I give thanks that God hears and and now comes forth into my visible world as the fulfillment of my true desire. Turn off your mind and feel your way in the direction that these words point. Open, open. Open your heart. Free your soul and soar. Experience God. Not some abstract concept, but a real, energetic presence deep within you. God abides within me. God is alive in me now. God is all power. God is the fulfillment of all I desire. My innermost God presence now radiates from the center to the circumference of my being. I give thanks that God hears and now comes forth into my visible world as the fulfillment of my true desire. And so it is.